We have a request, or actually a request from the tax assessor to make this change to 406 23rd Street. Just so that my memory is clear, I remember that Mrs. Platt did come before this body expressing concerns about the assessment and the assessment of property that is beyond the dune restriction line. Is that correct?
I don't recall her being at the meeting. I do recall some people coming. I don't know if she was one of those people or she mentioned dune restriction.
I believe she was, but I believe that is the area where this overassessment is what it is addressing at this point. And I've also, I didn't bring it, but I don't know if you have the memo from the tax assessor. There was a clarification memo.
Yeah, I sent it to everyone.
Right.
I didn't bring a copy for myself, but Lynn might have it.
I have a copy of it. The property's 80 by 100, correct? Is the home sit on 40 by 100, and then the other 40 by 100 is city property?
Well,
I don't understand.
It's
Lisa,
on
maybe
the
I
opposite
can
side of
help
the
you.
dune restriction line.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the property, and maybe I can help frame the discussion for everyone. This is a property that's if you're facing the beach on 23rd Street, it's the last property on the left. It's, and I'll refer in part to the memorandum that was prepared by our assessor that was sent around by the manager. The property has 80 front feet along 23rd Street and has a depth of 90 feet. Our development restriction line basically runs through the middle of the property so that the 40 feet that is most waterward is on the non-development side of the development restriction line. I mentioned those figures and the location of the development restriction line in part because the memorandum, I believe, misstates the size of the lot as 80 by 100, and then notes that the 40 by 100 portion should be 40 by 90 of the lot that is beyond the development restriction line and is deed restricted. I'm not aware of any deed restriction on that property. Our development restriction line, as we all know, is a creature of ordinance passed many years ago by City Council and continued and is reflected on our tax maps and adjusted from time to time as needed. But there may be a deed restriction on the property, but I'm not aware of it. So that may matter because when a property in taxation, when a property is deed restricted for conservation purposes, that's substantively different than a property which has the equivalent of a zoning restriction, such as a development restriction line. The memo indicates that the homeowner brought it to the assessor's attention after the appeal deadline had passed. The appeal deadline in the reval year, of course, is May 1st. And notes that after researching the matter, the assessor discussed it with Mr. D'Angelo of Vital Communications, which was the revaluation firm, and that he reviewed the property assessment and confirmed that the assessment for the development restriction line had not been applied. He then recalculated the value of the land assessment with consideration of the development restriction line. I have concerns about the methodology that is alluded to there, but I don't think it matters for our consideration tonight. I think the important thing is that, and I'm going to assume, for our purposes, that there was, in fact, when properly measured and properly assessed, an overassessment of the property. The problem is, I'm not aware, and I mentioned earlier to Mr. Schroeder, I know you've heard nothing of this until tonight, and I won't put you on the spot because, as you know, property tax in New Jersey is one of the most exhaustively and comprehensively covered fields by statute. Every single thing is the subject of a statutory provision. When I saw our agenda, I did a cursory review. I couldn't find anything that gave us, or that gives us, the authority in this kind of a setting to retroactively change someone's assessment, even if we would all agree that it was done, that the assessment was in some respect in error. Whether that's because of, a rethinking of the valuation or because of a flat-out error in, determining what the square footage of a property is or whatever it might be. If there's that kind of authority, that kind of statutory authority for us to act in the way we're being asked to act, then I really would want to know that and have a chance to look at it before I made any kind of decision on this. Short of that, my understanding is that the assessor has the right up till the closing of the books on January 10th. And as we all know, the property tax for the coming year is set as of October 1st of the pre-tax year. So in that approximately 3-month window, the assessor has the opportunity to make adjustments and corrections and to meet with people, and in a reval year that might have been pushed back a month, I'm not sure, maybe further. But in any event, there is a period of time when they can make administrative adjustments. Once you get past that period of time, the only recourse, again, as I understand it, and if I'm mistaken, I just need somebody to show me what is the law. After that, your recourse is to file an appeal. Now, in that appeal, if the assessor agrees with you, let's say you reach an agreement on March 1st that, yeah, you're overassessed and it ought to be reduced by X dollars, nothing prevents the assessor, once the appeal has been filed, from entering immediately into a stipulation of settlement with the property owner for the adjustment that they think is appropriate. But it's clear here that this happened after the appeal deadline had passed. If there's not some specific statutory authority that lets us act, or at least consider, and if we think it's appropriate to act in the way we're being asked to, A, we can't, and B, we really would be wise not to do that because, it's a very slippery slope. Other people who missed an appeal deadline or maybe had an appeal and didn't like the way it turned out, or, want to recast a difference in valuation as somehow being an error on the part of the assessor, I don't see how you would stop those people from making the same claims.
Councilman, I did have a chance to lock at it. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
That's okay. Absolutely.
Sorry, first day at school here with you guys, so I don't mean to jump on anybody's toes. You're right. I have no problem with you deciding to table this for a meeting to take a little more time to look at it. I was able to put my finger on the statute that I do believe handles that. It is NJSA 54:51A7, and the legislation there provides an exception to the regular tax appeal process for corrections in error of assessment. The first thing that has to happen is this bypasses the regular procedure for appeals. It can happen anytime within that tax year or within the next 3 years thereafter. The reason, however, has to be an error, not a matter, anything that could be subjective judgment. There are 3 enumerated categories that the state recognizes here, and whether you decide this falls into one of those 3 or not is an important decision. The first is typographical errors. The second is errors in transposition from one document to the other. And the third, which I believe is more germane here, mistakes in assessment. A mistake that's made in the assessment. It has to be plausibly explained, which you can determine whether you felt like it's been plausibly explained tonight. It has to be indisputable, and it has to be a matter that is not a matter of judgment of the assessor. So it can't be the assessor says, I think it was worth less than that, or I think it was worth more, or things have changed. It can't be an on-the-fly kind of thing. The opinion, it can't be an opinion regarding value based on that. But when we get into the idea of the mistake in assessment, because you're talking about that line and a miscalculation regarding that line, I think you are within your purvey to act tonight. But again, with that advice being given, I wouldn't be offended at all if you decided to table it for a meeting and take a look at it again.
My question on this is, this is right near where I live. It's like 4 houses away. And when I see the dune restriction line, I look up and down the beach, and the dune comes right down basically to the foot of most people's homes. But in this case, they're about 40 feet in front of that line toward the ocean. It's all carved out, it's paved, it's beautifully landscaped. So what's the restriction line mean?
I think Ed would probably be the best to describe this because it is a line that has been established by an engineering firm many years ago.
But I guess the question is, too, what is the mistake? When I see all the other properties,
it's not.
The dune comes right down, but this one, it's all carved into the dune.
You have no use of that property.
But it's being used.
No, for building purposes.
That's as I understand it. I believe the Pratts had come to either the planning board or council, probably council, several years ago for a waiver from the development restriction line to allow them to to improve, I think, with a wall beyond that development restriction line. And I believe that approval was given. They did not remove a dune. I'm going by memory. They did not remove any dune. It was an area.
How could they have not removed the dune?
It was that way at the time, for sure, because I think they even brought an environmental expert who testified before council. If my memory serves, I'm going back, at least 7, 8+ years. But at any rate, the development restriction line exists. It was plotted in, I think, 1980, roughly, by Pannoni Associates, and it was not an arbitrary line, but it was a calculated, determined line. In this area, there was a roughly 40-foot distance to the toe of the dune east of that development restriction line. So that's how
I find that really hard to believe, looking at the rest of the dune. And I go to the beach that way all the time. So the mistake is then that the assumption was that this could all be occupied by a building, and it's not.
As I understand from what was read on the memo. I didn't see the memo, but I believe that to be the case.
Well,
Mayor,
without having the memo,
Additional testimony from the tax assessor.
But you have
yes, I don't have the memo.
No, it was emailed.
I don't have the memo. I haven't seen the memo. I haven't seen the sheet from the tax assessor, nor have I seen any designs of where the dune line is and what's there now. So I'd like to have some time to evaluate it before approving it. I think.
Let's just table it then.
Then let's table it.
Table to the next meeting.
Motion to table.
Maybe, again,
I'd like to have the tax
maybe
assessor.
he can work with Fred and give him the information
All right.
Maybe you can give Fred the information and you work together.
Just Mayor, if I could just add something. I didn't get the memo either, but when I looked at the resolution today and I saw that we were granting an overassessment and crediting the individual $6,554.88, and that wouldn't be for just 2014, that would be moving forward. I did call the tax assessor and asked her what the circumstances were so that I could make an informed decision. And basically, it's already been stated that 40 foot of the property is not supposed to be used because of the dune restriction line. I did go and observe the property, and the entire property is being used. It's being used as a backyard. There's a retaining wall. There's planters. It's very, very beautiful. But to allow a homeowner to utilize the property for their benefit and then to reduce the value by $384,000, I'm not quite sure that, without getting more information about what you can and cannot do, I'm assuming that if there's a dune restriction line, that the DEP has to grant you the permission to develop that area. When I say develop it, not necessarily a home, but if anyone on council, should go over and take a look at the property, it is beautifully landscaped. It's all paved. There are retaining walls. I understand that if you have a dune restriction line, you have dunes there, it's your property, but you can't use it. I would agree that you should adjust somebody's value based on the fact that they can't use the property. But observing this property, that does not appear to be the case to me. So I think without additional information and facts, it would not be in council's best interest to move forward.
Tony, I have no problem tabling it, but I think everyone has outlined what information you're looking for going forward. But you should be aware of the dune restriction line because it is the only way the dune restriction line, the development can take place on the ocean side of the dune restriction line is that it has to come before this council, and this council can waive development on the side of the dune restriction line. In fact, when you owned the restaurant, we gave you permission to build a wedding chapel or something if you had DEP approval, if you remember that or not.
I don't know that was beyond the dune restriction line.
No, it wasn't dune. It was the dune restriction line.
But Phil, when that happens and the council waives that area, does that mean that no change in property value is affected?
Yeah,
Or the change in other words, the value of the property doesn't change even though the use changes of it for it? You know what I mean?
You're putting you're able to put a structure on it. Right now, you can't put a structure on property
No.
that is on the other side of the dune.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. If council waives the development, so says, okay, council
Right.
said they can go out and do that, does that also waive a change in the assessed value of the land?
Well, I guess,
Even-
and not to argue this because I'm not a real estate, but when I look at whether you have a property that you can build on a certain footprint, is that worth more than a property that you can't build on that footprint? So if you
Right.
have a lot that's 100 feet wide and let's say theoretically the setbacks are 30 feet on each side, so you can only build a 40-foot wide structure, is that less valuable or more valuable than having the ability to build out further? That's the
Yeah,
question.
because I look at the other properties that are adjacent to that, up and down the whole neighborhood, and I would think that that is an incredible enhancement to the value of that property. And the other folks are, denied that, so are we opening a can of worms by doing this?
Well, you have to look at, and I'm sure the engineer has copies of maps with the dune restriction line. It is not a straight line as I remember it. It is rather jagged.
It generally follows property lines for the most part, but there are occasions that it does bisect the property. And I imagine in the Pratt's case, it's likely that there was a combination of a number of 40-foot wide lots that were owned by the Pratts. The line split between two of those 40-foot wide lots. One now exists to the east of that development restriction line, and the building exists to the west on the remaining lots. I assume. I didn't look at this. I didn't prepare.
Well, Joe
for it,
asked
but
a
I
good
believe-
question, Ed, and I think that may need some clarification. How many other properties could there be potentially that?
We did just this year, if I remember correctly, Mr. Kelly from, I think, 30th Street came to council asking for a waiver from the development restriction line to allow him to construct a new home on his oceanfront property with a second floor deck that extended over the development restriction line.
Right.
And we granted that. And he was a case very similar, I think, to the Pratts in that the development restriction line, or that he owned property on both sides of that development restriction line.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the difference. It's not too often that property owners own property on both sides of that development restriction line. So maybe in the case of the adjacent homeowners that you were describing earlier,
Right.
they may only own the
Right,
property
right.
to that development
Yeah.
restriction line. They have a setback then, on that
Yeah,
one
because that
side.
would be my worry, that for somehow we're giving them an advantage over, a tax advantage over other people who, so
Is there a
it wouldn't.
setback to the line?
Not to the development restriction line, but to your
So you
property
can build
line.
up to that point? You can build it up to the line?
If you own property, for example, if I had an 80-foot wide lot and the development restriction line chopped off 20 feet of that, so essentially I have a 60-foot building lot, I can build right up to the development restriction line. There's no setback to that because my setback would be taken to my property line, which is 20 feet away.
Because the other properties in the area look like they all line up perfectly with about the building of the Pratt's actual building itself, and then that whole area is forward of it, and everyone else has steep dunes going up, right from the footing of the building.
Well, it's a very nice tool, the development restriction line, and I do have it. I know Jennifer has it, and it's actually in the council chambers in the meeting room. But it was a topographic map showing the dunes, showing structures on that ocean block all the way up and down, the island. So there, you'll see on that map, as of 1980, roughly, when it was developed, where the dune field existed at this property, what structures existed in that neighborhood, including on the lot, if one did exist there. But you will see where the toe of the dune existed at that time. And that may set your mind at ease that, in fact, it was further east
Right.
than maybe across
For
the
me,
street.
it's a question of fairness to the other people. I mean, the people in the oceanfront pay extraordinarily high taxes. And maybe most, if not all of them, are indeed overassessed. I don't know. But to say somehow we're giving one property owner or a couple tax advantage over others is totally unjust. And it can harm, I think it could lead to some harm for the city in the long run if that's contested. I mean, we could be really shooting ourselves in the head if we're not careful.
Jennifer.
The issue that's come up, though, is if with an 80-foot wide lot, only 40 feet of that lot is developable. And taking in the setback on the one side yard, that even narrows it down even more. So, I mean, this is a unique situation. I have no problem tabling it and getting more information, but it is not your normal assessment where the entire property is developable subject to our own setbacks.
Well, Jennifer, for our next meeting, which is, I guess, when we'll consider this next, I would like to have a copy before that of the actual waiver, the language of the waiver that was granted, if in fact that's what happened at City Council, a waiver of the development restriction line, because from the memorandum, it appears that Mr. D'Angelo of Vital was operating on the assumption that the development restriction line should not, or I'm sorry, that he had not allowed for the development restriction line and then adjusted, believing that it was in effect. But if in fact there was a waiver, partial or complete, given, he needs to know that, or he would have needed to know that in order to properly adjust his opinion of value. I mean, as Councilman McCarty said, and I went by the property as well, there are improvements. There are some substantial improvements, which I didn't measure. They appear to go probably to the full 80-foot width of the property. So that means you do have substantial improvements within the development restriction area. If a waiver was granted to permit that, that's fine, but it does go to value, too.
Okay. We've had motion and a second to table this. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?